Welcome to Pre-Shift, tidbits of wisdom for everyday service. My name is TJ Griffin, and I am the corporate wine educator for Winebow. Please use the Q&A to submit questions at any point during this webinar. Let me introduce your host. Ron Edwards is the husband of one wife, the father of 5 girls, a surfer and missionary kid. He has over 29 years of hospitality experience, and since 2018 has been the director of wine education for Winebow. And now, here to discuss today's topic, post-holiday bubbles, Master Sommelier Ron Edwards.
Well, hello, TJ, and
Hello.
Everybody out there. Welcome back.
Happy New Year.
Did you have a good holiday? Did you have some bubbles, TJ?
I did have some bubbles. I went with traditional champagne.
Well, all right. Do you want to admit to which one you consumed?
I consumed the Lançon
Nice.
Black Label.
Our house, we had a little Leclerc Brillant in the official champagne category. That was our Christmas morning tradition. But we had post-holiday bubbles during the holidays. So it kind of inspired me to think about, the bubbles that I served because, we just need sparkling wine all the time. Maybe that would apply to January and beyond for different reasons. So that's the reason for today. We try to have some sort of sparkling wine every day of the holiday at my house. Why? Well, we simply have to have bubbles. Breath in our lungs is enough to celebrate, isn't it? Why bubbles are just a necessity, not a celebration to me. I just consider them, while I never feel bubbles will be completely common, but I will definitely move down the path of being willing to drink them as wine, not instead of wine. And I say that because I had a great laugh at both the absurdity and the tragedy of it when my daughter's friend was getting married. And she asked her, well, are you going to serve champagne at your wedding? And she said, no, we're serving wine. TJ, she's serving wine, not champagne. And I thought,
how do you think that started, Ron, that champagne and sparkling wine just became this other thing?
I don't know. I really don't know. Now, admittedly, it is a kind of a different experience, right? But the idea that it doesn't even fit in this person's mind as wine, as a category, we need to know as salespeople and as hospitality professionals that reality exists in people's lives, that they don't even think of this bubbly, delightful, wonderful thing as wine. I'm going to go home and have a glass of wine. To me, that could be still or sparkling, but to most people, that is only still wine. And so part of our cultural barrier with sparkling wine that we need to overcome is the reality of it is wine. It works with food really well. It makes you happier and feel like Thursday is a weekend. It makes weekend a holiday. It makes ordinary extraordinary because it's wonderful, but it's still wine. As a matter of fact, I was considering this today, and I think the wine I'm going to open tonight to have with our pizzas is a Ziggity's Sparkling Gruner Veltliner, because I bought it as a daily wine. And why not, right? So let's see here.
What pizza do you think you'll be pairing that with?
Oh, it's sad. We're just clearing out the freezer. We have some frozen pizzas that were from Whole Foods at some point, and we're just like, hey, we got to get these out of here. So that's the reason for the sparkling wine, right? The food isn't so great, so let's improve it with some sparkling wine. When is the right time for bubbles? I thought instead of me telling you, I thought I'd let some historical figures tell you. Down on your bottom left of the screen is Coco Chanel. And she said, I only drink champagne on 2 occasions, when I'm in love and when I'm not. Okay, I like that thought. Betty Davis and her eyes, so to speak, said, there comes a time in every woman's life when only thing that helps is a glass of champagne. And that could be like every Tuesday, as far as I'm concerned. And Dom Perignon, often attributed to creating champagne, not really true, but certainly did a lot of the research to figure out how to consistently make champagne. He, being blind, did not have the visual stimulation of sparkling wine. When he first tasted it, he called out to his fellow monks and said, brothers, come quickly. I'm tasting the stars. And I don't know about y'all, but that's how I feel when I drink sparkling wine. The effervescence, the joy that it brings, the just difference in the texture and everything else, really, it inspires me. It makes me happy. And I think that it does that with almost all people. And that's my experience in the dining room, is that selling sparkling wine or champagne or both to a set of guests changes their lives instantaneously. And there is a reason that we need to concentrate on selling more of it. So all the time is the right time, for sure. But what about the budget, right? You have a budget. I have a budget. TJ has a budget. The guest sitting in front of you in a restaurant setting has a budget. The person shopping at your retail store has a budget. How do we deal with that? Because honest, official AOC champagne, AOP champagne from France is a different budgetary consideration than a bottle of Prosecco. So let's approach it from there.
When you were running wine programs, did your sparkling offerings change drastically after the holidays?
Not often, no, but part of that was because I was always trying to attack the sparkling wine service model from multiple tiers of pricing. So I didn't suddenly remove my official champagne that I was serving. I might encourage the servers to talk a little bit more about one of the other offerings, whether it was Prosecco, or maybe, because a lot of this was done in Michigan. We have some really good sparkling wines in Michigan. And so sometimes it was, well, let's highlight our Michigan friends because they're a different budget item. But I became more sensitive to what the budget might be of the guests, but I didn't really remove the option, because sometimes starting the conversation, they suddenly decide, I was going to spend $15 on a glass of wine today anyway, so it might as well be a better glass of sparkling wine. But you got to have the conversation get started. But there is definitely, without any doubt, we all know that the first quarter of the year in the US has a different price sensitivity when we start talking about not necessary items, like going out to eat, while lovely, isn't absolutely essential. And having wine is a luxury, not an essential, no matter how I feel about it. In my heart, I consider it an essential, but we can live without it. We can drink water. So they may not be spending the exact same that they were in the fourth quarter of the year, but they are still buying wine. Guests are still ordering wine in restaurants when they're sitting in them. People are still buying wine at retail, and obviously right now with more things shut down, they're buying a lot more wine at retail. They may not be buying the exact same bottles they were in December and November. They've kind of moved back to the conservative side of their everyday purchases, right? So if their normal everyday purchase was anything between $15 and $20 for their Thursday night, then they've gone back to maybe 15 in January, and they'll creep it back up as time goes by. It is in this concept that we have this awesome opportunity to explore sparkling wine from the delightful offerings from other places than Champagne. Places that make great bottles of bubbles, delicious bottles of bubbles, fun bottles of bubbles, but are not the budgetary obligation of AOP champagne. And we can find that great, delightful flavor and texture for quote unquote, in quotations, wine prices, going back to that comment earlier where the lovely young lady wasn't having champagne because she was having wine. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward in this conversation. Is the point of this is to bring to mind things you may have forgotten about, or maybe even never heard of, that are great opportunities to still show people sparkling wine, even traditional method, champagne method sparkling wine, when they're being a little more price sensitive.
Well, it's funny that you touched on it. I was wondering, in our current pandemic world, this is just my own opinion. I would assume that a lot of sparkling wine around the holidays is consumed on premise. And I'm wondering if the lack of on-premise activity has hurt that category. I don't know.
I didn't do any IRI data. I did talk to somebody recently who said that sparkling wine sales at retail were up quite a bit. there's a couple of people that I see on the list of attendees that could maybe send me a text or whatever if that's not true. But my impression was that the sales were up. I know that in our own company, our focus on selling one of our brands for December showed that we exceeded our goals. So we definitely didn't lose ground on that brand, even if we didn't necessarily keep ground across the board. But let's not worry about the past and move forward in the future. And where do we turn when we want to show people that they can still drink sparkling wine? They can drink wine that makes them feel like champagne, that gives them that momentary bit of sparkling bliss. And what they're saying to us is, no, I can't spend $20 on a glass of wine tonight. No, I can't buy a $150 bottle of champagne tonight. No, I really can't spend $65 retail on Friday evening dinner this time. And I think that we have some options for them. And the first one is Cremont everything, right? Cremont everything. Those are all those wines in France where Cremont means Champagne method, but it's not from Champagne. So it's Cremont de Bourgogne, Cremont d'Alsace, Cremont de Loire, Cremont de Die. And then there's other ones like Blanquette de Lemieux. Those are all French options that work really well. And then we have other places to go, like, well, we all know about Prosecco. I'm not sure how many of us have experimented with Sekt, which is either German or Austrian sparkling wine. We all know about Cava. It's a good reminder, though, that Cava is a great opportunity in the price to experience ratio. This is a very good place to turn when people are being cost conscious, because there's a very broad range of price availability in Cava. And then what about our own country? We don't have to go to Europe to get really delicious sparkling wine. California has lots of sparkling wine, and there's a broad range of pricing in California as well. And it depends on what quality you're looking for and what price you're looking for as to what you want to serve. But California is not the only one. Oregon's got some really beautiful sparkling wines. Argyle comes to mind. Michigan has several really delicious sparkling wines. New Mexico has a great sparkling wine producer. New York has several producers. And of course, who wouldn't want to sell a sparkling wine in February from Tasmania? Yes, Tasmania was one of the places originally sought by French champagne houses as an opportunity in the New World to produce champagne-style wines outside of France. And it's coming to fruition every day. So let's talk about Cremont is close, TJ.
Well, when are you, because you mentioned a few different things, when are you looking for something, a non-champagne alternative that's traditional method versus Charmat process or tank method?
Yep.
What is that decision process for you?
I think the decision process is a couple of things. First is price, right? Regardless of the region of origin, champagne method, traditional method, méthode classico, no matter what language you're using, that is a more expensive, time-consuming process. So even in less expensive regions, as we're going to see when I get to pricing a little later, it's still a bit more of a commitment to have a wine on your table that is traditional method. Charmat method is a little faster and a little less expensive, and therefore the wines reflect that and become a little closer to your everyday wine price in a lot of people's cases. And so that's part of it. Price is part of it. The other part is, what is it made out of and what are we trying to get out of it? So champagne method wines, the charm and delightfulness and flavor range of the wine is directly related to the time it's spent on those dead yeast cells going through autolysis, which releases esters and makes that thin, relatively low flavor, high acid base wine that makes the ideal traditional method start interesting. Whereas Charmat method, tank method, you can take a grape or a wine that's ripe enough to be already interesting on its own, make it effervescent and more interesting, but it's not going to be dependent upon the yeast interaction. So in the case of Prosecco, for instance, there's an aromatic nature to Glera that when you put it through traditional method goes away. So part of the charm of that grape is keeping it Charmat method. When we start thinking about Moscato, if you send it through traditional method, you lose a lot of that aromatic, playful and a fruit charm that is what it is. So that most people don't do that. So it's a kind of a consideration in both directions. And so let's talk about the Cremont. And as we move forward, we'll run into wines that are Charmat method, and we can talk more about those. Okay, TJ?
Sounds good.
All right, fabulous. So Cremont is close. It's very close. It's the exact same method. And in a lot of cases in France, it's the same grapes or a couple of the same grapes as Champagne with an alternate. So, first place to look for Cremont is Cremont de Bourgogne. It's the closest region to Champagne making a Cremont style. Alsace vies for that proximity as well. And still using Chardonnay, still using Pinot Noir, not using Pinot Meunier. And in some cases, if you look real close, you can even use a certain small percentage of Gamay in this. And therefore, like one of my favorite producers uses the Gamay for their rosé, and it gives it this really brilliant pop. So Cremont de Bourgogne is a great first stop in France. Now, there's a range of quality and flavor profile in Cremont de Bourgogne, but what you do know going in is this is traditional method. So basically, I'm buying Champagne from somebody else, from somewhere else. Really great option. Cremont de Loire. Here you have Chardonnay playing a part, and Chenin Blanc gets pulled in, which is a wonderfully tart grape that has a little aromatic nature to it. And if you put it through traditional method, it acts as a really great base wine for rich nut and yeast-driven characters, balanced by fruit that starts to taste a little bit like apple cider from the Chenin Blanc. So a really great option there. They tend to be very crisp and delicious. There's Cremont Alsace. Here you have a lot of Pinot Blanc usually in the blends. The wines are a little softer than the traditional what you traditionally think of with Champagne, and usually quite a bit more affordable. There's this oddball down in Northern Rhone called Cremont de Die, which is claret based, which is a white wine from the white wine grape from the Rhone, and that's super interesting. It's not on everybody's availability list, but if you see one, you should try it. They're a lot of fun. There's Lemieux, Blanquette de Lemieux, and Cremont de Lemieux. Can't say it. Cremont de Lemieux is the Chardonnay-driven version of the region, and so this is a direct correlation to the idea of a Blanc de Blanc from Champagne itself, but it's from the Languedoc, so much further south. Much riper fruit profiles are available there. So the wines are a little rounder and richer in general, but very affordable. And in truth, most people are now agreeing that the first intentionally sparkling wines and bottled as such were probably made in Lemieux. And then the Blanquette de Lemieux, or just Lemieux AOP, as you can find, is actually based on the local grape Malzac. And that one is delicious, fun, great value, and definitely in your course of running beverage programs and retail, you should look out for this particular AOP, because it's a really great place to even stack cases of a particular sparkling wine on the floor and send it out the door. And last but not least, the Jura, which is now the geeky sommelier loving playground. But the Cremont de Jura is Chardonnay Pinot Noir based, very much like Champagne. The two new grapes there are Trousseau and Pulsar. In general, well-made Jura Cremont is elegant, crisp, delightful, and not terribly expensive. All right. So how about the other European options? Well, we can't even move further than this without talking about Spain. Cava, a mainstay of the Spanish wine production, absolutely adored in its own country and well distributed worldwide, is one of our immediate hit list options for sparkling wine that isn't Champagne, but is made in Champagne method. Because of the way they make the wines, because of the fact that they automated it through creating the automated riddling process, they can make these wines so much less expensive than they are in other countries. And so Cava, legitimately made, traditional method, starts, like $10 retail and moves up. So you can fill a lot of holes with Cava. The better Cavas, are not running in that $10 range. They go up into the high teens as a starting point, or $20. What you should expect out of Cava is not nearly as crisp or light and refreshing style as a northerly climate. This is much warmer climate than what you'd get in Champagne or even Burgundy. And so the wines are rounder, softer, actually more friendly to a lot of people's palates. So they're a good starting point. And in a restaurant program, the right Cava is a little easier to absorb in the heart, so to speak, when you turn it into cocktails. So that's another reason to have it around. All right, so how about Italy? Italy is one of those countries where, like, everywhere you go has a sparkling wine, a dessert wine, a red wine, a white wine, and because they're such a regional culture. And so it's natural for us to go into Italy and look for delicious sparkling wine, some of which is traditional method, metodo classico, some of which is not. And we'll try to go through that as we look. So Prosecco. Prosecco is mostly made in Cremont method, closed tank method, because Glera, as we mentioned earlier, is an aromatic variety. That allows you to make more wine in less time with less financial commitment, which makes Prosecco a more reasonably priced option. Then there is Trento. Trento is a not well-known DOC in Alto Adige, where it is sparkling wine only, and it's delicious and quite affordable. And Lambrusco. Most people will not bring up Lambrusco when they start thinking about sparkling wines, but it is indeed a sparkling wine, and it is fabulous with food, and it's not terribly expensive, and a really great option to add into your, I didn't think about that, especially if you're running a beverage program that is a little quirky or has a craft beer focus, because Lambrusco is the natural wine transition for people who are really into beer. Lugana, from Lugana, there's a brut option instead of just dry white wine, and that one's really delicious. Zenato makes a great one. Asti, bunches of different people make Asti. There's so many applications for it, and honestly, it's a very easy to love sparkling wine. So if you're selling it to someone who's a serious wine person, suggest it with dessert. Have it with milk chocolate and tropical fruit together. It's marvelous. If you're working with a customer that is kind of exploring wine for their first time, from the sounds of the things that they tell you they like, caramel macchiatos, they like soda pop, they like, in the world of alcohol, they already like those rich, sort of sweet, toned beers. This is a great suggestion to get them into wine, and suggest it with something exotic like stir fry Asian or lightly, not so heavily spiced Thai food, and it's magic. Franciacorta shouldn't be ignored in Italy, but it doesn't really come at much of a discount from Champagne, but it's a beautiful alternative for people who love Champagne to explore Franciacorta. They will smile, because these wines are fantastic. They're made with great care and attention to detail. Their laws are actually more restrictive than the Champenois up to the north. Shouldn't forget Germany and Austria. These are not the easiest to find. Sekt isn't on everybody's shelves. It's not always on the tongues of the salespeople who are coming to see you, but Germany and Austria have some really, really well-made sparkling wines. And because of their climate, now we're talking about trading tart, refreshing, zippy, zesty style Champagne into another alternative that's very similar. And that's one of the real reasons to go to Sekt, is that you're going to make someone like me who really loves, like Brut Zero Blanc de Blanc. You can put them into this cold climate and put wine in front of them, and they'll be thrilled. One of the people to explore is Ziggedy out of Austria. They're a specialist in sparkling wine from the region.
Ron, it's Lambrusco seems to be having a moment. I was driving around right before Christmas doing some last minute shopping, and I heard Ray Isle on NPR talking about Lambrusco. Is that your experience, that it's becoming a mainstream option now? It's
really trying hard. I think instead of becoming a mainstream option, we know it in the past, it was absolutely mainstream, right? It was the white Zinfandel of the generation before white Zinfandel, right? The Riuniti on ice, that's nice. What's great about it is the high quality Lambrusco that is a serious wine is having a renaissance. That's the beautiful part, that they're outliving the reputation of perhaps what would be best labeled as a jug wine industry kind of thing. And that is great for brands like what we sell is Leany. Those wines are they're really well-made wines, and they're really interesting, and they're a beautiful expression of this group of grapes called Lambrusco. And they just need a chance. And I find them really great in, mixed environment cafes and beer-oriented beverage programs, and people who I think they really work well in places that natural wine works too, because they are a little closer to, I don't know, lower intervention kind of feel in their flavor profile. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how about New World? Yeah, we got to consider the New World. We shouldn't ever just live in wine from Europe. There's so many good options around the world right now. So how about California? I mean, there's a mix of everything from, what we call super premium level pricing out of California to wines that wholesale at the range of, $12 to $15 and sometimes a little less. And while the California sparkling wine industry is going to give you a wine that's a little richer and a little rounder, they work really hard also to keep their ripeness down without being green, to give you something that's perfectly well suited to the Champagne method. And there's a lot of effort in that around Carneros, but you'll also see a huge effort in Anderson Valley with that cool Pacific air sinking into Anderson Valley. Oregon, it's a super reasonable place to make sparkling wine. They have a moderate climate. They already have the grapes growing there that are natural for Champagne method, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And there are some very, very good efforts coming out of Oregon. Winebow here on the Mid-Atlantic sells Argyle, and their stuff has been delicious for years and years. Could have to shout out to Michigan, since I lived there for a long time. And the one that you definitely want to try there, if you have access to it, is Larry Mawby's wine, El Mawby. He's been making Champagne method wines now for almost 40 years. And he does it really well. And it ranges in price from, reasonable to then his super premium brands are the price of Champagne. New York, definitely going to find some good producers up there. New Mexico. Elevation changes everything. And that's how you take what would be a hot desert and turn it into a cool, wonderful place to grow grapes for Champagne style wines. And the star out of New Mexico is Gruet. And if you haven't tried their wines, you definitely should, especially if you can get a hold of one of their Sauvage bottlings, which is the Brut Zero version. Tasmania. Tasmania was first explored by Roederer and Moet Chandon quite a long time ago now, to plant vineyards for sparkling wine production there instead of Champagne. They were right. They just didn't stick around and keep it going. Since then, Australians wineries have gone in there and used it. And one place you can definitely look here is Tasmanian sparkling wine. I suggest you try Jan's. That's one that we sell. Selfishly, we import that. Yes, absolutely. It's delicious. I drink it on a regular basis. It's really good wine for the money. And we can't ignore South Africa, where they have their own name for sparkling wine out of Champagne method, Cap Classique. Graham Beck's a great option there if you haven't ever had it.
Ron, we have a recommendation in the New World here in the Q&A from Argentina. Amalaya, if I'm saying that correctly, Brut Nature non-vintage. It's a blend of Riesling and Torrontés.
Yes, I think I have tried that, and I agree. That is an excellent suggestion, and very reasonably priced. If I remember, David, you can respond in the chat window with what you think it sells retail, so that everybody else can be told as well. That would be helpful, because that's what I'm on, is pricing ideas, because it's really great to talk about all these things and list all these names and everything else, but I should at least give you a reasonable idea of what it's going to cost. It says it's under 15 retail, which is, that's great. I can have that on Tuesday. All right. So Cremont de Bourgogne, our star producer here at Winebow is Champliot, and that's basically $30 retail. And then one of the Feb producers is about 24. So your range there, you're going to have a hard time getting Cremont de Bourgogne much under 20, but, and it goes up from there. I think it's, it's still worth it. Cava, just two options, just to throw it out there. There's the $15 retail basic kind of Juve Cava, and then like Juve Comp Vintage would hit at about 25 retail. So vintage sparkling wine made by Champagne Method at $25 retail. That's pretty good deal. And start thinking that as your glass pour program, and you're like, yeah, that's going to work for me. That the Jans that I brought up from Tasmania is 32 retail suggested. Now, obviously, that's going to vary, and I'm basing this off of the Mid-Atlantic pricing for Virginia, and every state has its own wholesale on it. So these are just targets, right? California sparkling wine by Champagne Method ranges from that $15 retail and up. And certainly in California, you get more when you pay more. I would tend to want to use the wines that are in that mid-20s to 30 as a first choice out of California for this particular application. The Argyle that I mentioned, their basic sparkling wine starts at 31. Ziggity Gruner Veltliner, which I think is the one I'm going to open tonight, you can buy $25 a bottle retail at frontline margins. And then Trento, I looked up a couple of producers of Trento DOP sparkling Metodo Classico, and they ranged from $19 retail to about $25, which, all right, now we're, that opens up some doors. Zardetto Prosecco, that's the one we import, but you can look in, there's so many Prosecco brands now, but Zardetto ranges in price depending on which bottling you're buying, from $15 to $30 retail. The $30 one is the Long Charmat, which is taking Prosecco, leaving it in Charmat process with some yeast interaction for a little longer. And that wine is definitely elegant. And I would say it's worth the extra dollars for sure, especially if you want to change people's minds on what Prosecco is capable of tasting like. Then there's Lugana. So the Lugana that I'm going to bring up here is Zanato's Lugana Brut, which is a beautiful wine, and it's $19 retail, and it definitely drinks better than $19. Montan, Francois Montan, is made in Jura, actually. But this is a sort of a brand concept. Instead of trying to sell a region, it's still Champagne Method, but it's more like sourced from all over France. And that one's at $17, which, by the way, if you're doing a 21% cost of goods on your beverage program, is a $9 glass of wine that feels like champagne, tastes like good sparkling wine. This is something to pay attention to here. Lini, I brought up Lini earlier in the Lambrusco discussion, TJ, and their regular Rosso sells $19 retail. So, it's not Riuniti on ice. That's nice pricing, but it's pretty serious wine, and it changes the conversation around Lambrusco, which is the important part that's happening right now. Is the conversation has been altered to where this is now an acceptable wine option instead of just like, oh, my grandparents drank that. Larry Mobby, I looked up his pricing just as a by the by on his website. His basic Champagne Method wine starts at 25 and it goes up to 55 for vintage. Gruet starts at about $30 retail, and Grambec starts at about $32 retail. So a little bit of dollars and cents and programming, and how does this work in the profits and margins of the hospitality trade? So Juve Camp Brut 16 vintage, so the vintage, will cost 65 cents per ounce. Now, I always use flutes in beverage programs on premise for one reason. I can pour less sparkling wine in it, make the glass look full, and do a better job with margin management. So that's $3.28 per glass at a 5-ounce glass, which means I can put it on a menu for between $12 and $13 for a vintage Champagne Method wine. That's a really good option for you to promote as a manager of beverage programs, and it's a good option for the guest. In January, a $12 glass of wine, people are going to spend $12 for a glass of wine. It's hard not to. It's hard to find a wine on menus anymore that doesn't cost $12. And so there you go. I think I ran that margin at like 25% cost. Jans, on the other hand, is, and they have their own terminology. Their terminology is méthode Tasmanois, which is a combination of processes. And that wine can be on your beverage program under the same 5-ounce pour concept at $14 to $15 per glass. And once you taste that wine, you're like, yeah, I'm sold. $14 for that on my glass pour around January is perfect. So that's where the pricing tends to land. And I took a peek at our retail range for the legit champagnes we sell here in Virginia. And we're really starting in the high 40s to $50, $52 for the brands we sell. I know you can go out to Total Wine and some of their exclusive import wines you can grab at 38, 39, 42 for actual champagne, but the only people that sell that wine are Total Wine, and the only way you can get it is there. So it's not actually a nationalized brand. It's just for them. So that doesn't apply to you in the hospitality trade because you can't get that wine. Where are we on this, TJ? I think we have wrapped it up. Any other questions?
If there are any other questions, I have one while we're waiting for them to come in. Okay. A lot of New World sparkling wines look to champagne as their model, and they're working with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Mm-hmm. Some exceptions. David's recommendation sounds very interesting. I know the Larry Mobby wines work with some different grapes, but why is that? And do you think that will change? Because so many, you look to Europe, they're making sparkling wines out of everything.
Yeah, I think that in a certain regard, in some places, it needs to change. So for instance, I helped a gentleman, a good friend of mine, start a vineyard at his house. And the purpose of the vineyard is to make sparkling wine in northern Michigan. So 2 of the grapes planted on the property are Cayuga, Native American, and Vignoles, hybrid. 2 reasons. One, they're more winter sensitive and less sensitive to mildew and rot. And that's a problem when you can actually see Lake Michigan from your property. And both of them maintain enormous acidity ranges, which makes them perfect to turn into sparkling wine. So Larry Mobby showed me the path on this, where he has a 100% Vignoles sparkling wine that I often consider to be his best everyday option until you get into his vintage options. And then he makes a simpler version out of Cayuga, where it's just this bright, limey, slightly aromatic Cremont method option. So I think what they're doing is noble in that they want to prove that they can make quote unquote champagne here in the United States too. But the ideal champagne method wine starts at a fairly low pH, right? Like the great champagnes of longevity and elegance and style start at like 2.6 pH. That's such a painful beverage. That would be like straight lemon juice across the palate. We don't do that in California. You're just not going to come out with that kind of pH out of grapes. And so choosing grapes that have low aromatic profile with low pH is really the secret to making the beginning points of great sparkling wine, unless you're going to go into Cremont method. And so I think that while I wouldn't tell them to stop trying to use Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, there's also the climactic limitation on those grapes that they will ripen fairly quickly in warm climates, and that's not actually great for making method traditional wines.
Thank you, Ron. So question from Michael about some less obvious pairings for sparkling wines. You talked about Asti earlier. There's some other kind of cool combos that you could suggest?
Yeah, I think that the first thing to realize is that because of the bubbles and because of the acidity level, sparkling wines are actually easier to pair with food than still wines in a lot of cases. The one thing I would caution against, and we run through this like week in, week out at my house, because we like to start Friday evening with maybe a charcuterie, like simple charcuterie and some cheese, and we also start every Friday evening with sparkling wine. And invariably, my wife will look at me and say, "This cheese is terrible with this wine." And I always say to her, "We go through this every week. Cheese, and that kind of cheese, like triple cream cow's milk or Chev or, something that's got some serious personality, doesn't work very well with sparkling wine because it's a little too subtle. Whereas the sheep's milk, like Petite Basque or Oso Irati or just basic Manchego, that works fine because it's kind of ecumenical. But when we start talking down the path of where does sparkling wine become a natural model, all things stir-fried, soy sauce, Asian, sushi, until you get into elevated spice ranges for Thai food, all of that stuff works great with sparkling wine. If you haven't thought about it, champagne and fried chicken, oh my gosh, off the hook. Potato chips is all it really takes with champagne to start the joy machine. I can definitely put you down the path of beef tenderloin with rosé champagne or rosé sparkling wine is delightful. And then if you are going super fancy in a restaurant and it's sous vide beef, where it's not really got much of a sear and it's that different texture and it's almost like eating it in a raw state, fabulous with sparkling wines of all kinds, especially rosés. I love them to just substitute. Like people think, well, I'm having salmon tonight, I'm going to have white wine. I'm having salmon tonight, why don't I have champagne? Or why don't I have sparkling wine? Why don't I have cava? Like a good bottle of Juve Comp vintage cava and a grilled piece of salmon, fabulous. Really, really brilliant together. So I think that's more, not so much what's the unconventional pairing is, it's more like working real hard to find something that doesn't work. Right. And Antonio Gardella, hey, Antonio, great to see you on the conversation here. He suggests brochetta de cuit on Sunday mornings. Why not? Right. Grapey, sweet, delicious, low alcohol, with sausage and hash browns. Sounds fabulous. And certainly Asti, Moscato d'Asti and Asti are, tend to be relegated to sort of this aperitif, digestif kind of role by seriously minded wine people, or by other people, they just like sweet and they drink it with whatever. One of the secrets of sugar is it's like the food pairing's favorite thing, right? That's why chefs love to use sugar on plates, is it really makes you smile and it makes food taste better like salt does. And so those sweet wines work really well with food. And my favorite off the beaten path option for Asti, which can also work for Lambrusco if it's not the dry version, is border Mexican food with all of that cilantro and chili pepper heat. As long as it's not light you on fire. Once you get to that point, the beverage is irrelevant anyway, but normally leveled heat with, the refried beans and the tacos and all of that stuff with Asti is really, really delicious and unexpected, because we think we're going to drink beer with it probably.
My next pairing now is going to be Bricchetto and the Sunday crossword.
Love it. And you'll actually be able to finish the crossword before you fall asleep that way. Well, I think that's it for sparkling wine after the holidays.
So our next in 2 weeks, Ron.
Yes, in 2 weeks, January 26th, 3 p.m. The 5 P's of Hospitality Part 1, because I really don't think there's any chance we will get through all of them. I'm not even sure we'll get past one because it's the most important, but we'll try. And I discussed it in another episode, but I want to hit on it even harder. What we're going to do is wander through the absolute foundational pieces of running great hospitality businesses. You must create and control your 5 P's. And the 5 P's are your promise, your promotion, your property, your plate, and your persona. And they could be called other things, but that's what I called them in my consulting life. That's what we're going to call them in this set of webinars. And so get ready to hear about what the promise is and why it's so important that you nail it down and live in it.
All right. I'm excited. Stay safe, everybody. Come back, tell your friends, check out past episodes on YouTube, our YouTube Winebow channel. And thank you for attending today.
As a matter of fact, there's all kinds of things on Winebow YouTube now, and you can explore it at will. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye, everyone.